And you want to sort of, if you could bottle the vibe on the street, it's the same. It's people being happy to be together, recognizing that there's community, and whether, there's a life in politics. I never realized till I got involved in politics involves, costume changes. You put your cowgirl hat away. This is the closet where I always stay when I'm in Calgary. They keep my cowgirl hat here for me. So, I mean, it's a feather boa one weekend, it's a cowgirl hat the next. I have to rush back from Calgary to be in Victoria for Victoria Pride Parade. But it's a wonderful thing to see community come together, and that to me is the best of Stampede.
Welcome to a federal edition of Municipal Affairs. The Calgary Stampede, a place where cowboy boots crunch gravel, where the smell of pancakes and livestock hangs thick in the air, and where tradition meets politics in the most Canadian of ways. Yes, there are bucking broncos, chuckwagons, and enough denim to make a Levi's factory blush, but the Stampede is far more than just a 10-day rodeo. It is a global gathering place. Each year, over 4 million people pass through Stampede Park, not just to hoot and holler, but to do business, celebrate community, and spark conversations that ripple far beyond the midway. With more than 1,200 events on the calendar annually, from tourism forums to trade expos, the Stampede drives $540 million in Calgary's economy. But it's also become a political arena of its own. Leaders from all corners of the spectrum show up, glad handing through the flapjack lines, boots polished, and ears open. This year, among the crowd was Green Party of Canada leader Elizabeth May. She came not just to take in the sights, but to listen to Calgarians, to Albertans, to Canadians, and to the political winds blowing across Parliament Hill. Now, we caught up with Elizabeth May to hear what she's been picking up on the ground and what lies ahead for Parliament's 45th session. Elizabeth, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me on your tour through Calgary for the Calgary Stampede. This is day one as of us chatting. What brings you to Calgary, and what have you hearing so far in your first few hours in Calgary?
Well, I've been a regular Stampede attendee. Oh, I guess since when I first became leader, so 2006, I became leader of the party. So my first Stampede would have been 2007, and I love coming to Calgary, and I love the community spirit, the vibe around town of every. I was saying to someone we were watching the parade today and chatting with strangers. And I was saying, it's so interesting because last on Sunday, June 29th, I was in Toronto for Toronto Pride. And you want to sort of, if you could bottle the vibe on the street, it's the same. It's people being happy to be together, recognizing that there's community, and whether, there's a life in politics. I never realized till I got involved in politics involves, costume changes. You put your cowgirl hat away. This is the closet where I always stay when I'm in Calgary. They keep my cowgirl hat here for me. So, I mean, it's a feather boa one weekend, it's a cowgirl hat the next. I have to rush back from Calgary to be in Victoria for Victoria Pride Parade. But it's a wonderful thing to see community come together, and that to me is the best of Stampede.
The last time you and I chatted on this show, we were just talking about this off the recording that we were both in Calgary at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities here in Calgary. It was a little bit different than the last time you were here because last time you were here, we had a water main break, and that means no one was using water at the time and having showers. So a bunch of municipal leaders gathering together were quite smelly. It's a little bit different now.
Well, I did speak to FCM this year. May 31st, I had a keynote, and they were in Ottawa this year. And so there were no water main mishaps. Not that that's any credit to Ottawa or the fault of Calgary. We've got aging municipal infrastructure right across the country, and it's anybody's guess where it's going to happen next. But that's right, we were all And I asked people how many people have had showers, and fewer hands went up than would normally be the case.
I want to talk about some of the municipal issues that I'm hearing and get your perspective on them because one thing that I'm hearing, whether it be in Parksville, which I just chatted with one of their councillors yesterday, or District of Squamish, or even St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, the issue that I'm hearing over and over again is housing. The federal government, provincial governments, territorial governments need to step out and help municipalities. I was there when you gave your address to FCM. You did touch on housing a lot during that keynote speech to delegates in Ottawa. What does Mark Carney, Prime Minister Mark Carney, have to do to address the housing challenges today so municipalities feel like they're being heard, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, housing is one of those issues, like most issues in Canada. Nothing is exclusively federal jurisdiction, nothing is exclusively provincial. I try to think of any example which is where there's only one order of government that's got the responsibility to deliver. But there's no question but that the federal government was more engaged in housing decades past. CMHC built a lot of co-op housing units back in the day, say in the 60s and 70s. A lot of those buildings and providing really decent housing that was quite affordable has remained as community centers, decent housing and quite affordable. The federal government pulled away from housing. So it's not purely the federal government's responsibility, nor is it municipal government's responsibility. It's mixed jurisdiction. The difficulty that municipalities have, of course, is that the Canadian Constitution, when it was 1867, the British North America Act, that was when Canada was a country where the population of this country was almost entirely rural. Very few people lived in urban centers, and housing wasn't an issue. And neither was, so the municipal governments didn't get a crack at a taxation base they could count on. They've basically got property taxes and nothing else. So out of every dollar in taxes, roughly 10 cents, maybe a little bit more these days, gets into the hands of municipal governments. But when you think about services, who's picking up your recycling, your garbage? Who's making sure that, that you've got sidewalks? Who's looking after your water systems, wastewater, provision of drinking water? Municipal governments have the biggest burden of delivery and the least access to resources. So the federal government, in terms of what Mark Carney is saying, he's going to create a new agency for building uh, affordable homes and using more federal land. That's been something we've been talking about. There's a Canadian Lands Agency that exists already to do that. We could do a lot more. And I think, Carney's talked about prefab housing going back to post-war, having a prescribed and ready to go blueprints so everybody knows what you're doing and you don't have to get through so many different levels of permitting before you can start building. But there's also repurposing older buildings, thinking about what we can do to create the most, because we do have a housing deficit. We don't have enough units of available housing for the population of Canada. So we need more supply. But I think we also need to take the profit motive and the idea that a home is an investment property for people who don't even live here. We need to make sure that homes are for people who live in them and not speculative investments. So we should absolutely abolish real estate investment trusts. The idea that corporations can own the homes and they're not homes, they're investments. And then where can you afford to live if someone in another country is making money off the value in the house or the building, the property, the investment they buy? They're going to want to derive profit from that. We need to restore homes and residential properties to homes and not investments. And if we can get there, that takes some legislative changes, it takes some tax changes, it takes federal leadership, but it also takes partnership with the other orders of government. And it certainly means municipalities need to be in that partnership and have the kind of resources they need so they're not stuck with downloaded responsibilities from the provincial governments, but no resources to limited resources to be able to respond to the challenges.
One of the things that I heard over and over again at the FCM and in my conversations with municipal leaders from across Canada is The federal government often looks at municipalities as that golden triangle. They look at Vancouver, they look at Montreal, they look at Toronto. Outside of that, there's no issues that are going on in the smaller rural communities. And I say smaller because that's the three largest communities in municipalities in all of Canada. How does the Green Party see rural Canada addressing those housing challenges as well? Because I speak to small town mayors and they're saying our issues are the same. We need housing, but no one's helping us because we're the center of the electoral boundaries lie.
I mean, I'm from a rural area, and my riding includes a lot of rural communities. And the Gulf Islands, people may look at an island like Salt Spring Island and think, oh, that's an enclave of wealthy people. I think Salt Spring Island may have the highest per capita level of homelessness in Canada. Rural and remote communities are very much up against it on almost every issue. Climate emergency issues, housing issues, infrastructure issues, and they have the least amount of resourcing to deal with it. So we do need to focus. I think within the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, I mean, there's the caucus, as you would know, of big city mayors, but there's also a really terrific group of rural and remote community municipal leadership, and they're all facing the same kind of challenges. I was shocked. I guess it was a couple of years ago. It was mentioned to me that in small rural communities, like in interior BC, little towns like Ashcroft or Spence's Bridge, and the competition is for grant writers, right? Because everything's a lottery. You're not going to be able to get predictable, reliable funding for things Canadians need, and every Canadian is equal to every other Canadian. And it's not like you get a lucky ticket in if you're in a bigger city that has access to resources. You need to be able to make ends meet wherever you live. And the idea that small municipalities are competing for grant writers instead of being able to know this is where I can get predictable funding for the things my community needs. And it really requires, well, Greens believe it requires a rejigging of the relationship between municipal governments, provincial, federal, territorial, and First Nations governments. We came upon this years ago. What Australia does, and we believe me, I don't want to reopen the Constitution. Any change to the Constitution. Some of us are old enough to remember when governments have thought, let's reopen the Constitution. It's the third rail. No one wants to go there, but what Australia did, which we could do without opening the Constitution, is they created something called the Council of Australian Governments, plural. And then this table, instead of having a First Ministers Conference, whereas we know it's just federal, provincial, territorial, is open up that space in four quadrants. So one is your federal government table, and the other is over on this side of the table, federal, provincial, territorial. And then let FCM nominate or elect people who represent big city mayors, remote and rural, and have a section of that decision-making table that's the municipal order of government, and the fourth area being Indigenous governments. Now, Australia left out Indigenous, but the point holds that they make decisions with what they call state governments, federal and local, around the same table. If you can agree on the same goal by consensus around that kind of table, and then if the resources every order of government has are all going in the same direction, it's an old truism, right? There's only one taxpayer. Well, if you're all using the resources you've got at whatever level you've got them to achieve the same goal, which would say be every Canadian has a roof over their head, pretty basic goal, affordable housing. And yes, if some people, you don't, everything, not everything is public housing, obviously. People with lots of money, obviously in the marketplace, can afford a more expensive home. But the public policy goal is to make sure that everybody has a decent home. And we could do that. We're a
But are you
wealthy
optimistic
country.
about
We could
that?
absolutely do that.
Can I challenge you a little bit? Because I see
Yep.
the rhetoric that's going on in Canada right now. We see premiers drawing battle lines in the sand saying that we're not going to work with the federal government unless they do X, Y, or Z. And until they do that, we're going to assume that they're against us. And I'm pointing out two premiers in particular, Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan, Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta. And when the provinces and the federal government won't talk to each other and they won't even work together for a common goal of Canada, the like this democracy that we have, this Commonwealth that we have, it seems like that is something that will never happen, that four roundtable seats.
I guess I'm an idealist. It makes no sense to me at all, just to counterbalance. Why is it that the European Union, with I think 24 different sovereign nation states, some of whom were at war with each other, certainly in my parents' generation, get along better than Ottawa and Saskatchewan, Alberta? Like, this makes no sense. So the starting point is I think Canadians, citizens, the individual Canadian citizens of this nation actually can think like a country, and we'd like to see our governments act like a country. The level of inter international really cooperation within the European Union, we're capable of that in Canada, for heaven's sakes. And I think the Trump threats around tariffs are making Canadians realize more than ever that we need to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers. They're not tariff barriers, but there's all kinds of foolishness. And the idea that each province is sort of its own fiefdom, and one of the things that we need desperately to bring down electricity prices for Canadians and make life more affordable would be an east-west and north-south electricity grid. The European Union, again, example, European Union has a functioning electricity grid between all these separate sovereign nation states. We're one country, and we act like Hydro-Quebec, for example, has more than enough electricity that it could provide all the electricity that maritime provinces need. Nova Scotia is still burning coal for electricity. You can't get the electricity from Hydro-Quebec past a pinch point in Moncton. And yet, every Canadian, so Canadians, I think, can demand that the leadership we have, whether it's a provincial premier or a federal prime minister, work together. We can demand it. When we talk about it and identify it and say we want to see our governments work together to solve these problems, I think that pressure will make a big difference because let's face it, they, the provincial government, whoever's in power, their party, wants to hang on to power. So it's less that the individual MP or MLA wants to get reelected and more that the party they're in wants power. If Canadians start saying, we're going to boot you out if we don't see some cooperation, cooperation is essential for our economy. Cooperation is essential for the health of our democracy. And, finger pointing isn't popular with anyone I know. Like, normal people think this is dumb behavior. So let's just make it more of an issue and demand it.
Have you seen a change in Parliament? Because you were there under Prime Minister Trudeau when the rhetoric was at an all-time high, and it seems like the last 2 months, whether it be that Trump factor that you just talked about, has made cooler's head prevail. Have you seen a change in attitude, or are we just seeing sort of a calm before the storm, in some sense, the eye of the storm that we're currently in?
I've seen it. Certainly it feels more as if there's grown-ups in the room for sure. I want to see, like we've talked a lot about removing interprovincial trade barriers, but the focus in the media and the focus from Prime Minister Carney has been on removing the federal contribution to those barriers. And the bill that they brought in to do that failed to meet the mark, in my view. I mean, the Canadian Cancer Society was the number one critic of the part of Bill C5 that said we're going to bring down interprovincial trade barriers, because what the Canadian Cancer Society pointed out is it was potentially creating, in their words, a race to the bottom where the weaker or weakest of the provincial standards could become the dominant standards across all of the provinces and replace stronger federal regulations. Now, if these are just stupid red tape kinds of regulations, we can say, fine, pick whichever one's the easiest. But when the Canadian Cancer Society is saying you don't want to, you want to at least if you're doing a removal of barriers in order to enhance trade, put in an exemption if those barriers are there to protect health. Reasonable.
What did
We didn't stop to do that.
what did Bill 5 get wrong? What did C5 get wrong that, in your opinion, Canadians should be worried about? Because this was a bill that was, in all in purposes, was rushed through Parliament. I've never seen
Yeah.
a bill that is so large being rushed through Parliament so fast. Prime Minister Carney will say, because we want to get things done, we want to start today, not 5 weeks from now or 5 months from now. We want to start doing now. We need to build faster, we need to build better, and so on and so forth. In From your perspective, what did C5 get wrong, and what would have made it better in your opinion?
I got just about everything wrong. And I don't mean that in a partisan way. It starts with assumptions, and I'd prefer to have legislation that starts with evidence. So it starts with assumptions. It starts with we want, I mean, and it's true, no question, we want one Canadian economy. We don't want 13 separate fiefdoms. We want one Canadian economy. We want a country that thinks like a country. So back to basics, evidence-based, personally, and sort of the Green Party policy was let's make sure we protect the sectors that are at risk because of Donald Trump's erratic behavior and his tariffs. So if our forest product sector is at risk, we like to focus on, and this is just green policy, natural resources, strategic reserves, so that we don't have a sector at risk because of U.S. tariffs. We have the resources as a country, and we checked this out, and all of our policies in the election were not all the policies, but I should say our financial projections were reviewed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, and we actually brought down the deficit faster than other parties, but who would have imagined that would be the Greens? Though they're all still, the studies are still published on the Parliamentary Budget Office website because once they study something for a political party's platform, it is public domain, it's a study. So what we wanted to say was, look, let's buy up at the price that the industry wants domestically. Let's buy up our forest products. And rather than a rip and ship economy where we ship out raw logs, and certainly on Vancouver Island, it's just so maddening because we've got sawmills that want raw material and they could keep the mills running and we get more employment or benefit to the local economy. We're still shipping out raw logs. Why do we do this? We should hang on to those resources, use them in Canada. So again, the only product in Canada, the only resource that's in a strategic reserve, is maple syrup, right? So why? We should put potash in a strategic reserve, and we actually costed it out with the Parliamentary Budget Office. What if we were to say, we've always had Canada savings bonds. What if we had saving Canada bonds? And we as individual Canadians could buy bonds that would, for instance, buy up potash. Right now, the U.S. For agricultural sector has bought up all the potash they need for this growing season, but next growing season they're going to want our potash. What if Canadians have invested in it, bought it, set it aside, sell it to trading partners that we trust, or hold it in reserve and let the price keep going up? Anyway, I won't go on and on about this. Things we should do. What did C5 do? C5 assumes the one thing we need is to build special projects. What are these projects? Well, we don't know. So what we've done is we've given basically a blank check to the federal cabinet to pick projects. Now, of all kinds, we don't know what they're going to be. No idea. They could be energy product projects. They could be transportation corridors. Well, who knows? But the cabinet by itself will decide and put it on a list, at which point, if other laws are broken in order to build these projects, uh, under a law that Henry VIII created unto himself, only C5, no other Canadian legislation has ever said, if it ends up breaking a law, that's okay because we want to build this project. based on not evidence, based on a political discretion held by the cabinet of the day. This bill will last for 5 years. The Liberals may very much regret this if it's a conservative government that has all these powers, because this is the most untrammeled political discretion, abuse of power I've ever seen. On the other hand, as bad as the bill itself is, the way it was pushed through, which you alluded to, I mean, to say we're going to do second reading on Monday. Tuesday, we're going to set up the committee to study the bill. It'll meet for 2 hours. And then Wednesday, all the amendments on the bill are due. By Wednesday midnight, if we haven't debated those amendments, we're just going to vote on them without discussing them. And it's all done by Friday. I mean, God created the earth in 7 days. Not that as a Christian, I don't take the Bible literally, but my goodness, this is quite the pace Mark Carney is setting for himself. I hope he rests on a Sunday. This is just breathtakingly ruthless.
Well, just on that note as well, I remember seeing a interview with Senator Paula Simons from Alberta, where she said in the interview, I think it was with David Cochrane from CBC, Power and Politics, that the Senate felt they were pressured into passing this as quickly as possible as well, without getting any true second sober thought, as they are so eloquently called. That even the Senate felt pressured, and there's no liberal senators in an office right now.
No, I mean, the House and the Senate were given strict marching orders. This must be passed. Now, how could that happen with a liberal minority parliament? This is what I really didn't see coming, Chris. I thought after the election, I thought, okay, well, it's a minority liberal government. They're going to need, even though I'm just one Green MP, there's going to be times they're going to need my vote. There's seven NDP MPs. They're going to look to them. And the Bloc, wrong. They don't talk to any of us. They've got the conservatives. So the liberal minority government can push through things with a bulldozer and steroids because it's got conservative support to do it. Now, how long that will last, who knows? I like civility. I like to see Prime Minister Carney cross the floor and shake hands with Andrew Scheer, but I don't like seeing democracy trampled. And it was, a conservative commentator like Andrew Coyne who was pointing out that this is absolute abuse of power and treating democracy as if parliamentary democracy itself is an obstruction to our economic success. And that's just not true.
I want to turn to one of the big stories that's been making news out here in Western Canada, from northern Manitoba in Flin Flon, from northern Saskatchewan, and just even the last few weeks in northern Alberta. Wildfires have been forcing Canadians from their homes, and some of them are returning. I think earlier this week it was announced that a few more communities in northern Saskatchewan are being evacuated because they have one road in and out of their community, and there's a fire that is approaching that. It is the northern community of Laval. Former NDP and Liberal a member of Parliament is the current mayor there, and I've chatted with him a few times, Rick Laberte. How can Canada help communities that are facing evacuations? Because it seems like year after year, month after month, these stories are not going away and they're only getting worse.
I, for anyone watching, I suggest get one of the most brilliant books I've ever read is called Fire Weather by John Valent. He's one of the best writers I've ever read, but he also spent a lot of time. He started researching what was going on with wildfires at the time of the Fort Mac, the Beast. We're looking at what's happening is that the changing climate globally, the changing climate globally, the science is really clear on this, is because we've been burning so many fossil fuels that we've changed the chemistry of the atmosphere. We've double glazed what was a greenhouse effect that was beneficial for humanity. If we didn't have the greenhouse effect, this planet would be too cold to sustain mammalian life, which is basically us. So we were basically, if I go from talking about greenhouses to Goldilocks, I mean, it was like we were at exactly the sweet spot, just right, not too hot, not too cold, just perfect. And we've wrecked that. So we're now on a pathway where getting back to the stable, predictable climate we had. I was born in 1954. My childhood was in a stable, predictable climate. The climate we've created now is unpredictable and less hospitable to us than it used to be. And so the number one thing we have to do is to make sure we don't go past a point where we unleash irreversible, unstoppable, ever accelerating global warming. We haven't hit that spot yet. We have passed the point where we can go back to the climate we used to have. So we're locked into an ever-changing climate regime, and we have to hold it at a level where the ever-changing climate regime is one to which we can adapt. So point one, we have to make sure we stop increasing our emissions. Two, we have to be better prepared. So how do you better prepare? And it's not just, I mean, just, it's wildfires everywhere. And when it's everywhere, in May of 2023, every province in Canada except Prince Edward Island had out of control wildfires, including provinces that usually don't, like Nova Scotia. We're now 4 years since almost to the day that Lytton, British Columbia, burnt to the ground in about 15 minutes. Lytton is now on evacuation alerts and forest fires, well, not, and wildfires again. Doesn't have much forest around Lytton, but wildfires. But the heat dome, 4 years ago, when Lytton burnt to the ground, the temperature nearby had hit 50 degrees Celsius. I know that because it's my husband's property, his family farm up near Lytton, a place called Ashcroft. It was 50 degrees Celsius. These are not in the range of things that we've experienced over hundreds of years. So heat domes, that heat dome in 4 days in British Columbia, 619 people died in 4 days. We're not prepared for heat domes. We're not prepared for forest fires. Then we had in the November of that same year the atmospheric rivers and we're still preparing the infrastructure in British Columbia from the highways that got wiped out. So you said, how do we prepare? It seems like they're getting worse. You bet, they're getting worse. What John Valen's book points out, Fire Weather, is that the climate crisis has created a new kind of fire. That the fire is burning hotter. It creates its own winds. It's more dangerous and harder to predict and harder to fight. So we can create better fire breaks. We can make sure we're planting more deciduous trees, the hardwood trees. They're moister. They're less prone to being tinder dry fuel. We can remove fuel from around homes. We need to fire smart homes. There's lots we can do. And we also have to have better warning systems. One of the first things that happens in any big extreme climate event quite often is you lose your landlines and you lose your cell service. So in my riding of Saanich Gulf Islands, they're throughout, particularly Salt Spring Island has a very sophisticated system. It's a community of 10,000 people, but we have a whole bunch of volunteer ham radio operators and creating neighborhood by neighborhood warning systems. We're not very good at, we don't even, when Lytton was evacuated, by the way, I talked to people who were driving away, driving out of Lytton. They didn't know if they were driving towards the fire or away from it. So we need better warning systems. We need good, cohesive neighborhood community resilience. We need to better prepare and have better water management, flood management. We need much better preparation for how to save lives when we have a heat dome. We've learned a lot of lessons from the heat dome in British Columbia, but they're not lessons that are applied by governments. So it's a lot of things. The important message, I know I'm talking too much. The important thing I want to share is there's things we can do. There's things individuals can do to better protect their own homes, better protect their own neighborhoods, be better prepared locally, as well as there needs to be leadership from different orders of government. But it's, boy, for Rick LaLiberte and people who are dealing as mayors, the mayor of Flin Flon, when he was, I was seeing him on television and thinking, God, he's saying we're shutting down the town. We hope it's still here when we get back. Well, it looks like by the grace of God, Flin Flon's going to be there when they get back. But these are not things where we should continue to act like we're surprised. One of the lines in John Valen's book is don't think of this as the hottest summer in the last 300 years or whatever. Think of it as the coolest summer for the next 300.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that because
Yeah.
10 years ago, that election in 2015 was run on the environment. That was a key platform, along with who do you want, Stephen Harper gone or someone else in. But the environment took center stage. I would say even in 2019, the environment took center stage. 2025, it was not about the environment.
Yeah.
And the people I'm speaking to, and again, I'm just talking to mayors and councillors and reeves and wardens across Canada, the environment is not on the top of people's minds because we've become so accustomed to it. We've become so accustomed to, oh, there's another wildfire in Canada right now. We're going to send our thoughts and prayers and we're going to send money to help people, which is understandable. And that's what we should do. We should help financially people who are suffering. But we don't react as we used to. When I remember when Slave Lake burnt down,
Yeah.
it was the big thing. When Fort McMurray started burning down, it was a big thing. But now it seems like every year it's like, okay, there's another wildfire, and the news doesn't talk about it. How do we get people to start talking about it? Because unless it happens in your own backyard, you kind of grown accustomed to just, there's another one.
I think it really, it's what's the responsibility of governments? This isn't about, you don't do polling to decide if you're going to survive. When the science tells you that there's an existential threat to survival of human civilization, and a person is in elected office, and they sort of go, "Oh, no one seems to care about it now, so I'll think about it later." I mean, I don't know if Winston Churchill did polling before deciding not to give up and surrender to Hitler. Not compare now, anytime I compare climate change to Hitler, people are going to think I'm calling other people Nazis. No, just saying there's leadership and then there's polling. So in an election campaign, if obviously the top of mind issue in the 2025 election, we thought it was going to be affordability, and it rapidly became elbows up. It rapidly became who's the best. I mean, as if we elect a prime minister. It's another problem. We don't elect prime ministers. We elect individual members of parliament, and we form a parliament, and whatever party can hold the confidence of the House is going to be government. But never mind. We know what we just went through in 2025. It was as if we were a two-party system, and as if we had a stark choice between Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney, as if we were electing the leader to take on Trump. In that context, I don't blame anybody for thinking climate doesn't seem to be an issue this election. But that doesn't absolve people in leadership from taking steps to save lives. I mean, we're no longer, this is not well, I don't think climate change was ever an environmental issue. It was always a security threat. The first climate conference in the first international climate conference with the public outreach and lots of scientists there. I helped organize it because I was in the Minister of Environment's office. It was the last week of June 1988. That's how long ago. But the conference was titled Our Changing Atmosphere Implications for Global Security. Climate change, human induced climate change, has always been a security threat, but it's been treated like an environmental issue. When it's an environmental issue, we can get to it later. I'm speaking on the sort of the general vibe, not my own view, obviously. But if it's an environmental issue, it's one of those things that it's a nice to have, but who really cares? If it's a security threat, well, I mean, geez, when we started thinking that toothpaste was a risk on airplanes, we put a lot more security before we boarded a plane to make sure no one was bringing liquids on board the plane. A security threat gets taken seriously. As long as we think that the climate is an environmental issue, it gets pushed to the bottom every time. When we see, as I said, 619 British Columbians died in 4 days in June, well, late June, a couple of days of early July 2021. That's a tragic loss of life. And the BC Coroner's Office confirmed 619 people died in 4 days because of a heat dome. When you see any loss of life and we've been blessed in Canada that we haven't had the kind of event that happened in Maui, where you get so many deaths in an out of control wildfire. Fort McMurray is the fact that a community was evacuated and that so many people got to safety so safely is a tribute to the community spirit and the first responders of Fort Mac, where nobody panicked, people stayed orderly, driving through driving through literal hell on all sides and getting to safety is a tribute to community cohesion, to our values as Canadians that we literally don't leave anyone behind. But it's a security issue. It's not, and the threat increases when we decide it doesn't matter today. We'll get to it some other time. And the opportunity to get to it some other time is diminishing rapidly. So, I mean, I would, I think that if nothing else, we need to share with people, look up how to protect yourselves. Look up online, go online. By the way, there's a center in University of Waterloo that has some of the best website information for how to fire smart your home. At University of Waterloo, Google Intact Center. What do you do to better protect your home from the risk of flooding? What do you do to better protect yourself um, from a heat dome? And it's not just air conditioning, because in a lot of major natural disaster emergencies, you also lose your power. So you don't want to be counting on air conditioning. You want to have a strategy. You want to protect yourselves and protect vulnerable neighbors. And I think it's not all on government to do this, but government's got to take a lead and say we need to be resilient and we need to help people have the tools they need, and we need to reduce the threat by moving away from fossil fuels and reducing our emissions.
I have one last area I want to talk about, and it'll be quick because I know you're a busy lady and you're going to be meeting with some Green Party members here shortly. So I want to ask about the man down south, the man that is causing so much heartache, headaches for Canadians from coast to coast to coast, and that is President Donald Trump. We are recording this on Independence Day for the Americans, 249 years since they left
Yeah, they had a whole
England.
revolution to get rid of the king and they got a new one.
How do Canadians prepare for an uncertain trade war with this man? Because every week it seems like we either have tariffs, we don't have tariffs, we have to bend to the knee, but hopefully we are not bending at the knee to ensure that we survive what is going on in his mind. But Mark Carney seems to be lost right now because we had the digital sales, digital tax. Now we don't have a tax. But now there's going to be another thing that Donald Trump's going to come out with and say we need to implement. He continues to talk about the 51st state. Is there any negotiating with Donald Trump, in your opinion?
I don't think so. We have to insulate ourselves from him and the US economy as best we can. And we can. We're a country with enormous resources and we have allies. We already have a free trade agreement with the European Union. We have trade agreements with Japan, with South Korea. We have trade agreements with more reliable allies who are also democracies. How could Trump possibly announce publicly that he's going to get Greenland one way or another? Denmark is one of the first NATO allies. Denmark and the things Trump says and the things he does, the behavior of ICE, of his immigration service in targeting schools and centers of worship, these are the actions of someone who is against human rights, against fundamental morality. I mean, this is one of the reasons that now two popes in a row are pointing out that, you know, Christ was a refugee. What on earth does it take to awaken our dear friends and our neighbors to the south of us? Because let's face it, most people in the United States of America are not to blame. And even if they voted for Trump, can't hold them responsible for him. But we can protect ourselves. And we should never have cut the digital sales tax because that was a global effort to try to get these predatory, monopolistic, the digital giants, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, all these companies, Google, they've made billions while carving out fundamental parts of our society. They've made housing more expensive by gobbling things up in Airbnbs, back to where we started with housing. They've undercut our democracy by sabotaging our journalism through things like, when Kijiji and Craigslist replaced the classified ads section in the back of every newspaper, they undermined the source of revenue to most every local newspaper, and local newspapers are fundamental to democracy. It's not just that we're taxing them because they're big and they're billionaires and they're making money here. We're taxing them because they've made money by undercutting our society, making the mental health of our children suffer at the same time that they scoop up their billions. These guys are criminals. Yeah, we don't. So what we do is we need to protect our resources, protect our economy, and as much as possible get away from our traditional 100 years or more of our economy that we're hewers of wood and drawers of water and a provider of resources to wealthy multinational corporations. No, Canada needs to develop our own resources. Nothing should be exported raw. Everything should get its value added, pulled out of it. And if we do export raw resources, why would we? But if we're doing it to allies we can count on. Donald Trump is now not an ally one can count on. The United States will eventually again be a good neighbor. But for right now, disentangle ourselves, protect ourselves, and also be prepared to protect others because the people Trump is targeting are vulnerable and they're going to need protection. And just as despicable as it was in the Second World War when Canada, when under Mackenzie King, we turned away the St. Louis in Halifax Harbor as Jews escaping Nazi Germany were sent back. We've got to be prepared to take people here because we don't know what's coming next for people of color, trans, LGBTQ, people within the United States that are right now in Trump's crosshairs. Who's next? We have to defend Zelensky. We have to help Ukraine. We have to make sure that democracies around the world know that Canada stands firmly on international law and that we will extend ourselves to help others because we are against all odds and we're not going to crumple because of Trump's threats. But I'm really worried. I mean, when Lloyd Axworthy, as solid a liberal as Lloyd Axworthy said, our former Minister of Foreign Affairs, says that what Mark Carney just did was quote unquote bootlicking, I think Mark Carney should think more about how much he caves to Trump in order to continue to try to negotiate to remove tariffs. Because who would believe a single word Donald Trump says? He negotiated COSMA himself with Justin Trudeau's government, with Chrystia Freeland in the lead negotiating. And Trump says, oh, she's a very nasty woman. And Canada is, according to Trump, Canada is nasty to deal with. Right after getting rid of the digital sales tax, he's going to go after supply management. Why was it that eggs in the United States became a luxury product? Because they didn't have supply management. So when avian flu hit a U.S. poultry operation, millions of poultry had to be killed. It drove up the price of eggs. Because of supply management, which wasn't the goal of supply management to keep barns to only 10,000 hens instead of millions, but supply management in the end protected us and kept the price of eggs affordable. Supply management has meant that Canadian milk doesn't include a product that at least we kept it out of Canadian milk because we didn't think it was safe back in the day. Bovine growth hormone from Monsanto isn't in Canadian milk, but it's in milk for the United States because they went ahead and approved that. We got to fight like heck to protect supply management in Canada. And that's the next thing Trump's going to go after. And unlike the digital sales tax, there's a stronger case in the kind of world of trade rules and not being protectionist. Supply management is really going to be in his crosshairs and at risk. So again, protect our economy, protect our communities, protect our natural resources, create strategic reserves as much as we can, invest in our own economy, and trade with people whose word means people, governments, countries, where their word is meaningful. Right now, Trump's word is meaningless. And let Trump and Elon Musk duke it out. They deserve each other, but we want no part of them as individual narcissistic billionaires. They can have it. They can go off on their own. Jeff Bezos, take him. We Canadians have to take care of ourselves and our economy first and trade with people we trust.
My final question for you before I let you go is what's your message to Green Party members in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta right now? Because the last election saw your party reduced down to your single seat. You
Mm.
lost Kitchener Center and Mike Morris. He was a great guy. I got to see him once and hear him speak, and he seemed like a great down to earth gentleman and probably a hardworking MP. But you're by yourself again in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
What's your message as the Green Party looks to rebuild and potentially win back 5, 6, 8 seats next election?
Well, I think it will happen. I mean, one of the things that's happened is that the big the pressures and the headwinds we were going into in that election, I thought the headwinds were going to all be about strategic voting, with people wanting people, so-called progressives, whatever, wanting to do whatever it takes to avoid Pierre Poilievre being prime minister. We had weird headwinds of fear-based voting about Trump and fear-based voting about Pierre Poilievre. And in that, the Liberal Party took an advantage that I didn't see coming, which was the strategists within the Liberal Party, I believe, were trying to get rid of all Greens and NDPers, even if it meant electing a few conservatives along the way to make it a two-party system. So for democracy to work well, and Canada has over more than 100 years had three, four, five, even six parties in the House of Commons. I don't think Canadians want to move in the direction of the US dynamic of you're either a Republican or you're a Democrat. It's a two-party system, and we see how well that works. So going into the next election, I think we just have to remind people, and I think it explains itself. Do you want to be like US politics and be a two-party system? Or do you want to make sure that the NDP revives and rebuilds, that Greens have more MPs, that we continue to have a parliament where it's required to work together and negotiate to get things done, rather than one party having all the power? That does take electoral reform. We will continue to call for it. When you talked about the 2015 election, I don't think Justin Trudeau would have won a majority at all if he hadn't thrown out there that 2015 would be the last election under first past the post. He didn't mean it when he said it, and obviously it hasn't happened. But that winner take all system is why we have such, again, to you say voters in Saskatchewan and Alberta and Manitoba, it's not good for democracy when, thanks to first past the post, the votes for instance, Liberals, New Democrats, and Greens don't amount to much in Alberta or Saskatchewan because they get discounted when the candidate with the most votes wins. None of the other votes count. That ends up with more regional divisions where you can have a cabinet where a Liberal prime minister looks around and says, well, who do I put in cabinet? It's quite possible, and certainly in this election, certainly there are not enough Alberta members of parliament in the Liberal caucus to have proper representation from Alberta in the cabinet. This is not good or healthy for democracy. So, we have absolutely wonderful leadership in the Green Party at the grassroots across the country. If Mike Morris runs again, and I sure hope he does, I know he'll win again because he lost by few votes, and so many people in Kitchener Center are so sorry because he was the best MP they ever had, and they recognize it. You look at the Kitchener newspapers, Kitchener Waterloo press is full of people with voter regret. They voted so-called strategically, and lost the best MP they ever had. They want to get him back. So my message is always the same: is believe in democracy. To me, believe that talking to your neighbors matters, that every vote counts, and don't for 1 minute give up because what we're fighting for is too important. Which is to say, as a grandmother, I'm fighting for my granddaughter, and I am not my grandchildren. I've got step grandkids, and I've got this little new baby granddaughter, Lily, who, Chris, she's 8 months old. I've got a responsibility, and I'm going to fight like hell, tooth and nail. And that means to everybody, you know, who feels the way I do as an older person, we don't have the right to be so selfish as to walk away from the mess that we've left. We can clean it up. And that means in an election campaign, get out and knock on doors. And for young voters, believe in yourselves. You have power now, and your country and your planet and even your grandparents need you. So if we all pull together, which I think we can, my message to Greens is don't for 1 minute be discouraged. It's a miracle, considering our headwinds, that we did as well as we did. And I'd rather be Green after this election than the NDP peers had farther to fall. And they're in a more painful episode in their evolution than we are. We'll be fine, and we'll have more Green MPs elected next time. But frankly, if the Green Party could cease to exist and in exchange we could get good policies out of all the others, that'd be great. It's not for me about the party. It's about what we represent in a respectful parliamentary democracy where what really matters is the greatest good for the greatest number, taking care of our society and taking care of the only home we have, which happens to be the only rock revolving around the sun that actually sustains life. Rather important to continue to live on Earth as if we plan to stay.
Elizabeth, I want to thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to sit down with you and chat. I hopefully this is not a once every 2, 3 years conversation, and it's more regular. But I appreciate you taking time to do this, and I look forward to meeting you in person once again and having a good chat over in person rather than virtually. So
Me
thank you so
too.
much.
And Chris, and to you, all of your listeners, as my husband said, I got married for the first time when I was 65 years old. So that was 6 years ago. And my husband said, honey, it's going to be great. I'm marrying you. I'll never have to speak again. So I just want to say, Chris, if you want to have me back and say, this time we want short answers, and we're going to do the whole podcast and have it in and done in a 15-minute episode, 5 minutes, I can do it, just so you know. I'll be back.
Well, you don't know my listeners then because they like long formats. So thank you so
Oh,
much,
good.
Elizabeth.
Okay. Well, as I said, I married a cowboy. I'm so lucky. He's so sweet. That's another long story. Next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, as you are probably aware, as you've just watched, this episode is not traditionally within that municipal affairs realm. But we understand on this show that municipalities can only survive and work well when they have support from the federal, provincial, and territorial governments. That is why on this show, we believe it is important to bring those views and perspectives onto this show to hear from the leaders, from officials, from ministers, from MLAs, MHAs, MPPs to understand what is going on in each jurisdiction when it comes to municipalities. So we want to thank Elizabeth May for sitting down with us and chatting about her views on municipalities and so much more. We also want to take a moment and say, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an upcoming episode. Your support means the world to us. So share this episode with your friends, your family, and yes, even your community, and help keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs shortly. Till then, everyone.